In every manga series, there are normally 12 characters who are really necessary. Even if there are other characters in this series, most manga or comic or light novel series will usually have these 12 major character types that the story will be focused around. These 12 character types can help with the pacing and the plot and overall make the story a lot more interesting to read. So who are these 12 character types and how can you implement them into your own manga, comic or light novels? That is what I will be talking about in today's video. So as well as talking about these 12 kinds of characters that you will need in your manga, comic or light novel, I will also be talking about how to write these characters. I think writing the characters is the most important part of the process, and so knowing how you can implement these character types should overall be able to improve your manga and make it more interesting to your readers. Even with these tips, even if you've already developed characters, try and look at the characters in your own stories and consider if those characters can fit into one of these 12 character types. Of course, try and also be creative with the tips in this video. These would be more for the stereotypical character type, however I always encourage you to go further and try and be unique with your character creations. Also, much of these 12 kinds of characters can actually be merged together. For example, a protagonist character can match a few of the other character types that will be mentioned in this video. Usually in a longer manga series, these 12 character types will be more prominent. However, if you're having a smaller series, it's likely that these 12 character types might be merged into a smaller number of characters. So without further ado, let's go into these 12 character types and I'm going to tell you who these character types are and how to implement them into your own stories. So the first character type is, of course, the protagonist. The protagonist will be the most important character in your story and they're the character that drives the story. Usually your protagonist's main goal will also be the main goal of the story. The protagonist will obviously be the most important character and the most fundamental character to your story. Some examples of anime protagonists are Naruto Uzumaki, Toru Honda from Fruits Basket, Tanjiro from Demon Slayer, and Yato from Noragami. As your story progresses, it will usually focus on the protagonist working to achieve their goals and also going through all of the other events in the story. So here is how to write a good protagonist in your own manga, comic or light novel. My first tip for creating a good protagonist character is to choose at least one aspect of their design that is going to be unique and eye-catching, but also make that aspect to their design something that is relevant to their story. If you look at the most popular anime protagonists, you will notice that there is usually something about their appearance that really helps them stand out among other characters. Not only this, but that aspect to their appearance usually also has something to do with their story. So for a character like Kaneki, you will see that his white hair design is more popular, and this is because the white hair and the mask make him stand out a lot more from other anime characters. For a character like Sawako from Kimi ni Todoke, her long dark hair is a major aspect to her character story. So no matter what kind of genre or story you have, you will notice that usually in a good protagonist, they will have an aspect of their design that is very unique from other characters. Not only this, but that unique aspect usually also ties into their story. So I recommend for you creating your own protagonist, you consider adding a unique aspect to their design and tie that design into their personal story. My second tip for creating a good protagonist character is to make them realistic. Give this protagonist flaws. I think one of the biggest problems with a lot of badly written protagonists is when they are too overpowered and they're not realistic. If you don't give your protagonist enough flaws or problems, they're going to seem like they are too supernaturally perfect, and a reader usually prefers a character that they can relate to more. They prefer realistic characters. I think one of the greatest examples of a more failed protagonist is with Kirito from Sword Art Online. Now, I'm not saying Kirito is a bad character, but Kirito is not exactly realistic. He seemingly has no flaws and always manages to defeat the enemies. If we were to fix Kirito, we would need to give him more flaws and actually show his progression to becoming a more powerful character. So with your own protagonist, make sure that above all else they are realistic. I recommend maybe giving them 1 or 2 good qualities and 3 flaws to balance things out and make sure that this is a well-rounded character who isn't perfect but has room to grow over your story. Now, as well as this, as you're creating your character, try to put yourself in your character's position and consider the decisions they would make over the course of your story. If you were that character, think about what would you do? What choices would you make? And the more you do this, the more natural you can create your protagonist and the more realistic they will seem over the course of your story. My third tip for writing a protagonist character is give them a strong reason to achieve their goals. As I mentioned before, a protagonist's goals will usually be the main goals of the story. In order to keep things interesting, you need to make sure that your protagonist has a really strong reason as to why they need to achieve their goals. If they don't have a strong reason, then it's going to be hard for your readers to actually root for them as your protagonist is working towards fulfilling that goal. Usually the strongest reasons for a protagonist's goals come from the characters around them. So maybe there is someone close to them that they want to save, or maybe they want to change things in their town, or maybe they want to get out of a difficult situation. I recommend again that you try and put yourself into the shoes of your main character and think about, if I was this character, what would be my reason for wanting to accomplish these goals? And also consider, is this a strong enough reason to drive the story? Because the protagonist's goals are the main goals of the story, so you obviously need a good reason behind those goals in order to keep your readers interested as your protagonist works to achieve them. My fourth tip for writing a good protagonist character is consider the problem that holds them back. It really shouldn't be too easy for your protagonist to achieve their goals, so you need to add some barriers to stop them from doing it too easily. Now, usually these problems stem from the antagonist, however there are other factors that come into stopping the protagonist from achieving their goals too easily. These can be developed from conflicts, from internal tensions, or even just the protagonist's own fears. Whatever these are, it will stop the protagonist from being able to too easily achieve their goals over the course of the story. My fifth tip for writing a protagonist character is that when they fail, they must have a reason to stand up again, and they should fail often throughout the story. The key to creating a good protagonist is that they should fail a lot, because that failing will help them in their character growth. But the key here is that they should have a strong enough reason and goal to be able to stand up again after failing so many times. If you look at the best protagonists, you'll notice that there's been a lot of times where that character has failed and they haven't succeeded, but they always have the willpower to be able to stand up and try again. And that is one of the major factors in creating a protagonist. They need to have the willpower to be able to succeed even when things look completely dire and it looks like they might not be able to. My sixth tip for creating a good protagonist character is to give them 3 main characteristics and 1 standout trait. Of course, your protagonist will likely have other traits. However, for a good rule of thumb for developing a more well-rounded protagonist, try and consider 3 main characteristics and 1 unique standout trait. So for their 3 main characteristics, you might say they're intelligent, they're friendly, they're funny, they're charming, whatever you'd like to say. But then for the unique standout trait, their unique trait is something that stands out more in their character and is a trait that really makes them into the character they are today. Could be compulsive, they could be forward-thinking, they could be awkward, or they could be brave. These extra unique traits can be anything you would like. However, you need to consider that this unique trait will be something that drives their character more than the other traits are. You also need to keep in mind that this trait doesn't have to actually be a good trait. They can also have bad traits as well. And I think adding traits that might not be perfect can also help with developing your protagonist in a way that is more realistic. Any traits, whether positive or negative, can all help to shape your character. My 7th tip for writing a good protagonist character is make them take charge. No one likes a protagonist that just sits back and says, oh, I'll just let the side character do that. Oh, I don't need to deal with that. That gets very boring and tedious over the course of a story. Everyone likes a protagonist that is able to take charge and work towards their goals. And of course, your protagonist doesn't have to be doing this all the time, but it does make them a lot more interesting if you show them in that way that they are motivated and they are willing to achieve these goals. Because the more motivated your protagonist is, the more motivated and excited your readers will be to actually see where the story goes. So I really recommend that when you're writing a protagonist, you make sure that they also are resilient enough to be able to take charge where other characters might not. So my second character type in this video is the antagonist character type. Now, I consider the antagonist character type to be just as important as the protagonist is. The antagonist will also be there to help drive the story and keep things interesting. An antagonist character will usually have a goal that is just as strong as the protagonist goal. However, the antagonist goal will usually be in conflict with what the protagonist wants. The antagonist will be the one that causes problems in the story, and they are usually the main source of conflict and tension in a manga, comic, or light novel. Some examples of anime villains are Griffith from Berserk, Naraku from Inuyasha, Madara from Naruto, and Annie from Attack on Titan. Also keep in mind that an antagonist doesn't have to be a person. An antagonist can be a thing, a situation, or even an emotion. If it causes conflict in the story and stops your protagonist from fulfilling their goals, then it is an antagonist. So here is how you can write a good antagonist in your own manga, comic, and light novel. My first tip for writing a good antagonist is consider that your villain should also have just as strong of a goal as your protagonist has. The best villains are the ones who are the heroes in their own story. The antagonist is definitely not just there to stop the hero. A villain will have their own goal and their own things that they want to achieve throughout the story. The goal of an antagonist will be the goal that they will be working towards throughout the story, and that goal is the driving factor of the villain story. My second tip for writing a good antagonist character is that they need to have a strong reason to fulfill their goals. As well as giving your villain a strong goal, they also need to have a strong reason to fulfill their goal. If their goal is to become powerful, you need to answer the question of why they want that power. Maybe as a child, others told them that they are weak, so as they got older, they wanted to prove that they could be powerful. When creating a villain, you need to consider what is their goal and what is their reason to wanting to fulfill that goal. Once you answer those questions for your villain, they will be much more developed and compelling as characters. My third tip for writing a good antagonist character is that they need to believe that they are right. Even if the antagonist may be doing something bad in your story, usually to the antagonist they actually believe that what they are doing is the right thing in their opinion. They think that whatever they're doing is the right decision and that everyone else is just being foolish because this antagonist believes that they are right. So in the case of most antagonists, they will usually justify their actions in their own mind by any means possible. So if they stop the hero, they could justify by saying that their goals are more important. If a villain character killed someone, they might say that this character was in the way. So no matter what happens, a villain will always believe that they are right. Now along this line, I also want to mention that a villain can know they are bad. So if a villain kills someone, they can feel that guilt. However, keep in mind that they still need to believe that they are right by making that choice, even if they think they are bad for doing it. This is normally the main underlying trait that creates an anti-hero. They might feel bad for what they do, but they do it anyway because they believe it is right. My fourth tip for creating a good antagonist character is give them a reason to be bad. Now usually this reason will stem from their backstory. An antagonist should definitely not just be bad for the sake of being bad. That creates a flat character after a while. You want to make sure that when creating your villain character, they have a good reason why they do the things they do, and this reason will usually stem from things that have happened in their childhood. So depending on the events in a villain backstory, it can turn them into the villain they are today. A villain that was abused may turn into an abuser. A villain who was neglected may be determined to capture everyone else around them. A villain who was raised to be perfect may now like to live under a facade while still doing bad things. So there are so many ways that a backstory can affect a villain, but I recommend you consider your own villain story and consider what shaped your villain to be the character that they are today. And my fifth tip for writing a villain character is that you need to give them powers that make them hard to beat. Now by saying this, I definitely don't mean to make them overpowered. They should still have flaws just as the protagonist should. By this I mean that you should make them difficult. Don't make them so easy to defeat that the protagonist can just instantly defeat them. They need to cause a challenge, and these could be through using supernatural powers or physical powers. They could also just be mentally abusive, or they could just be really manipulative. Whether their powers are something physical or mental, it should be a power that stops the protagonist from defeating them too easily. Now my third character type I will be talking about in today's video is the Deuteragonist, and I am so sorry if I pronounced that wrong at any point in this video. So these characters are the secondary protagonists. They are not the main character, but they are usually there to help support the main character, and they will usually be just as prominent in the story and also help by contributing their goals and their plot and their stories to the main plot of your manga, comic, or light novel. Some examples of anime secondary protagonists are Genos from One Punch Man, Norman from The Promised Neverland, Katsuki from My Hero Academia, and Toka from Tokyo Ghoul. So here is how to write a good Deuteragonist. My first tip for writing a good Deuteragonist is that they must contribute to the plot. If you could take away your secondary protagonist and it doesn't affect the plot at all, then you need to fix them. These characters should also affect the plot just as much as the protagonist should. So your Deuteragonist characters should also have goals, have plans, and also deeply affect the story. They need to be making decisions as much as the protagonist does, and these decisions should also just as much affect the story. So if there are events in your story that you are thinking of having your protagonist do, consider if those events could be shifted to your Deuteragonist. Consider if there are things that your protagonist do, try shifting them to your secondary characters instead in order to make a more well-rounded plot. Your protagonist shouldn't be doing anything, and a lot of what your protagonist does should also be shifted to your Deuteragonists. Divide their decisions between them to keep things interesting and compelling as you progress in your story. My second tip for writing a good Deuteragonist character is that they need to reflect another side of the protagonist's personality, usually a side of their personality that they aren't even aware of. One interesting thing about Deuteragonists is that they will usually reflect a side of the protagonist's personality that they may not even be aware of. Usually these differences can make a Deuteragonist very different from the protagonist. For example, if your protagonist is a cold and harsh character, your Deuteragonist might be more kind and sweet. Even if it might not seem like it on the surface, the Deuteragonist is likely a character that reflects aspects of the protagonist's underlying personality, and this is what helps to draw them together in the first place. So when creating your Deuteragonist, consider what aspects they may reflect from the protagonist and aspects of them that make them different from any other character. My third tip for writing a good Deuteragonist character is give them a trait that causes conflict with the protagonist. My third tip for writing a good Deuteragonist character is give them a trait that causes conflict between them and the protagonist. One of the Deuteragonist jobs in a story is actually to cause conflict between them and the protagonist. This conflict can really add to the tension in the story and make the story overall more interesting. So with such different personality traits, it's no wonder that there may be conflicts that would arise from that. Also, with your Deuteragonist making decisions in the story, mistakes can be made and conflicts can be caused. With all of these characters being invested in the story, it should be natural that a conflict would develop. But this conflict keeps things interesting and makes their connection mean more when the characters are together. My fourth tip for writing a good Deuteragonist character is give them a trait that brings them and the protagonist together. Even after their conflicts and arguments, there should be something that can help to bring them together. This trait is something that should have brought them together in the first place. They might have common interests, common feelings towards situations, or a common goal. Maybe the kindness in the Deuteragonist is something that the protagonist lacked before. Whatever it is, you need to consider a common trait that can help to bring these characters together and build the connection that needs to be there. And my fifth tip for writing a good Deuteragonist is that you need to change their connection over time. A Deuteragonist needs to grow over the course of the story along with the protagonist. Things should change in their connection. They might become closer friends, or they might slowly become enemies. They might learn things together or fulfill the main goal of the story. Both of these characters should change, and as a result of the story you have told, these characters should develop more. It's natural for this to happen as the story progresses. They should not stay the same as they were from beginning to the end of your story. Both of these main characters should change and grow through learning things, training themselves, and becoming better friends, or even becoming enemies. The fourth character type I will be talking about in today's video is conflict characters. Conflict characters are characters that cause conflict or tension towards the protagonist. They are the characters that stop the protagonist from reaching their goals as easily. Conflict characters are not on the same level as the antagonist, however they usually have similar goals to the antagonist, or they may even be on the same side as the antagonist. Conflict characters can also change over the course of the story to even becoming good characters or of course becoming more evil over the course of the story. Some examples of anime conflict characters are Kyoko from Madoka Magica, Kurumi from Kimi ni Todoke, Hyoga from Dr. Stone, and Bankotsu from Inuyasha. Here's how to write a good conflict character. My first tip for writing a good conflict character is give them a reason to have similar goals to the antagonist or a reason for them to support the antagonist. Most conflict characters will be on the same side as the antagonist. They might just have similar goals or they might be directly working with the villain. Some conflict characters might not just be nice people and they might just be there to cause problems for your protagonist. For example, Draco from Harry Potter is a conflict character. He's not the villain of the story, but a lot of his goals over the story relate to those similar goals, making him a conflict character. Much of the Death Eaters in Harry Potter and other minor antagonists in the story can also fall under conflict character. So for your own conflict characters, you need to consider why they might not be very nice characters and why they might support the antagonist. These little details will make them into more developed characters and make them more interesting and compelling over the course of your story. Your conflict character may not be on the same level as your antagonist, but their goals should be just as important. This brings me to my next point. My second tip for writing a good conflict character is you need to give them goals that make them into a bad character. Bad is in quotations because to a conflict character, they believe that their bad goals are actually right. So let's say you had a conflict character who is a vampire. This character might have the goal of stopping the human protagonist because they believe that the vampires are the good ones. Even though their goal is not good, they still believe that they are right. If you had a conflict character whose goal is to be popular at school, they might believe they are right because they feel that the school needs someone to control them. My third tip for creating a good conflict character is make them cause problems to their protagonist. Conflict characters are the main way to stop your protagonist from achieving their goals too quickly. So in order to do this, you want to make sure that your conflict characters have a good reason to stop your protagonist in their tracks. They need to cause problems in order to keep the story interesting and make your readers curious to know what happens next. My fourth tip for writing a good conflict character is you need to give them their own problems that they must face. A conflict character must have their own problems to deal with, and this is usually the reason why they became this conflict character in the first place. So using the school example again, where they wish to become popular, maybe they feel the need to be popular in the first place because of their parents who never gave them attention. Maybe the vampire who has the goal of defeating all the humans wants to defeat them because he always got attacked by humans in the past. So a conflict character is more of a deeper character than you might think, so they should all have their own problems and conflicts to deal with, even if they may be causing problems in the protagonist story too. My fifth tip for writing a conflict character is you need to make sure that they change over the course of the story. A conflict character will definitely not stay the same. They will usually either become good over the course of the story and improve into a better character, or your conflict character might become more evil and become more of a bad character over the course of the story. Whatever it is, your conflict character should change over the story as much as your other characters would. They should change and develop as the story progresses, and that will overall make them into a more three-dimensional character that is more realistic and compelling. So my fifth character type I'm talking about in today's video is the allies and friends character type. Opposite to the conflict characters are allies and friends. They will usually not be a prominent part in the story, but they will be there to support the protagonist and the main characters in their goals. They might even help from time to time in small ways, but usually they're just there to be a supporting role to the main characters and encourage them in what they are doing. Some examples of anime allies and friends are Jack from Beastars, Gilda from The Promised Neverland, and Ui from K-On! Here's how to write a good ally or friend character. My first tip for writing an ally or friend character is give them a good reason to be friends with the main character or protagonist. Now usually this is quite a natural process. Usually these characters might have been friends with the protagonist as they grew up, they might have gone to the same school, they might have gone through the same training, so it really depends on the world of your story. When you're considering the protagonist story, consider where the protagonist is and how your protagonist would naturally be able to make a friend. Even if your character was just an online gamer, they might be able to make friends online, and that's how they find this friend or ally character. But usually this is quite a natural process, and it's not something that needs to be forced. These friends or ally characters are usually characters that help to shape the world and help to develop your main characters further. My second tip for writing a good ally or friend character is you need to give them a reason to support the protagonist or the main character's goals. As I mentioned before, a friend or ally character is an opposite character to a conflict character. So instead of being like a conflict character and opposing the protagonist's goals, a friend or ally character will be there to support and encourage the main characters in their goals. So overall, what a friend or ally character needs to do is they need to be supportive and encouraging, and they might not be able to directly help, but they should be there to maybe give advice sometimes or just listen. But overall, it can be really helpful if you give them a stronger reason to support the protagonist's goals, and maybe this reason is also a part of their backstory as well. Maybe they've known the protagonist for so long and they simply want to help. Whatever it is, giving them a reason behind this supporting role can really make them into more three-dimensional characters and help avoid creating these friends or allies into flatter background characters. My third tip for creating a friend or ally character is you need to give them minor goals. When it comes to a friend character in a story, their goals will usually relate to the bigger goal of the story. So usually when it comes to a friend or ally character, maybe they've been directly affected by the villain of the story, and so if your protagonist defeats the villain, that would solve their friend's goal too. A friend or ally has a minor goal that can usually be resolved naturally over the course of the story. Their minor goal is something that the characters wouldn't have to go out of their way to solve. The goal would be something naturally accomplished through the progression of the story. My fourth tip for writing a friend or ally character is to give them common traits, but also opposite traits to the protagonist. A friend or ally character should be created from a mix of common traits from the protagonist and also some opposite traits. They might be friendly and kind, like the protagonist, but the protagonist might be motivated while the friend character is more unmotivated. There are many examples I could give, but just consider for your own friend characters what traits they have in common with the protagonist and what traits they have that are completely opposite, because these opposing traits can help them stand out more as characters and again avoid them becoming flatter characters. My fifth tip for writing a friend or ally character is consider their life outside of being this character type. One of the problems I see with a lot of anime or manga or light novels is the fact that the outside characters, like the friends or allies, don't really seem to have an outside life outside of just being a part of the story. This character will be in there when the protagonist seems to need them, and then this character will just disappear. So you need to consider, to make your characters stand out more, even if they're just side characters, you need to consider what their life is like outside of the main story. You need to consider what do they do when they're not present in the story. Who do they talk to? What is an aspect of their daily life? So even if you might not directly show this in your story, it can help if you as the author know this and know what this character actually does. And then when your character does show up in your story, it's going to be a lot more natural for that character to be there, rather than having that character just appear in your story because it's a convenient moment for the plot. They could have a more legitimate reason as to why they need to be there at that moment. Maybe it's to do with their hobbies, or maybe it's to do with their daily schedule. But whatever it is, consider giving your friend or ally characters an outside schedule outside of the main story, and that will make it much more realistic when they do appear in your story. And my sixth tip for writing a friend or ally character is that they don't always need to be supportive. Sometimes a good friend or ally character just needs to be the voice of reason to the protagonist. So that's something to keep in mind. They don't always have to be supportive, but they do have to be sometimes the voice of reason. They're not going to be harsh to the protagonist or mean like a conflict character would, but sometimes we need someone there to tell us when something isn't right, or we need someone to warn us or give advice, and that's what the friend character can be there to do. If your protagonist is about to do something dangerous, a friend or ally character could step in and warn them that it's dangerous and tell them not to do it. Your friend character can be there to support the main character when they are doing their things, but if the main character is doing something that seems risky, your friend character can also step in and warn them and tell them that it's not a good idea. My sixth character type in this video is the mentor character type. Mentors are the characters that give advice when your protagonist may feel lost or unsure of what to do next. Usually the advice or kind words from a mentor character can help your main characters know where to go, even if they're feeling lost or they don't know what choices they need to make next. Some examples of mentor character types in anime are Jiraiya from Naruto, All Might from My Hero Academia, Luna from Sailor Moon, and Master Roshi from Dragon Ball. Here's how to write a good mentor character type in your own manga, comic, or light novel. My first tip is don't make your mentor character wise and all-knowing. They are just a character, just like any other character in your story, so they're not someone who will likely be completely wise or all-knowing. A mentor character won't be all-knowing, and that's okay. They just need to be there to give advice to the protagonist when your protagonist needs it. With this advice, your protagonist can get an idea of where they need to go next, especially if they are lost on their journey. This advice from a mentor may teach them something that they didn't know before. So even if your mentor says something foolish or says something harsh, that information is usually something that your protagonist can work with, and a piece of information that can guide your protagonist to know what they need to do next. My second tip for writing a mentor character is that their knowledge usually comes from their own experiences. Usually the mentor was actually once like the protagonist. They gained their experience through going through the same situations, and now with that gained knowledge, they can help the protagonist go in a different direction to the one they did. What they have learned and teach will normally come from experience that they have gained over time. My third tip for writing a mentor character is that they sometimes need to be harsh. If it means getting information to the main character, sometimes a mentor character will force themselves to be harsh. Sometimes harsh things need to be said, even if it hurts at first. When a mentor says something like this, it's likely that the protagonist would be upset for a while, but they might consider their words and realize the truth behind their meaning. My fourth tip for writing a mentor character is that when the characters are lost, they need to give advice. Again, they might not be able to know everything and be able to answer the big problems, but they should be there to give advice to help the protagonist get back on track. With the advice of a mentor character, they might understand the situation better or know exactly what they need to do next. A mentor character won't give them the answers to everything in a situation, but they will help them understand things a bit better, and it can even spark an idea in the protagonist's mind that they might not have thought of before. My fifth tip for writing a mentor character is that they don't know how to solve the big problems in the story. It needs to be like this because the protagonist is the one that really needs to solve the big problems, not the mentor character. The mentor character might be able to give them a piece of information or advice, and that advice can usually guide your main character into finding the answers for themselves. Through this information, they can usually be guided towards the information that they need to know and the path that they need to take on their own. So the mentor character can't answer the big problems in the story, but they can be there to help guide the protagonist to finding those answers for themselves. A mentor character can train them and teach them new techniques, which is a common thing in a lot of mentor characters, but they can't answer every question that your protagonist may have. My sixth tip for writing a mentor character is that they can make the protagonist into a better person. Usually from the advice from a mentor character, it can shape the protagonist over time into becoming a better character. The character who they were at the beginning of the story could be changed through the advice of a mentor character. Usually through some sort of training that the mentor character may give them, a protagonist can become stronger and more meaningful as a character. If a mentor is harsh, then it might teach the protagonist to be a stronger character. If the mentor was kind, then it could teach the protagonist to learn to be a kinder person. So however the mentor taught them is usually the way the protagonist learns things too. Through the advice of a mentor character, a protagonist can be made into a better character. My seventh character type in this video is the love interest character. Now this character type is usually the character that your main character or protagonist may fall in love with over the course of the story. It also doesn't have to be permanent love, and sometimes this character type can also be merged with a Deuteragonist character type, a conflict character, or any other kind of character type. Now also when it comes to a love interest character, the love can also be one-sided, so the protagonist might like the love interest character, or the love interest character might like the protagonist, or any other character in your story. Some examples of love interest characters in anime are Hinata from Naruto, Ochako from My Hero Academia, Haru from Beastars, and Kikyo from Inuyasha. So here is how to write a good love interest character for your own manga, comic, or light novel. My first tip for writing a love interest character is make them more than a love interest character. One of my main problems with a lot of anime and manga that have a love interest character is that they seem to be just a character who seems to be a reward at the end of the story for the protagonist to end up with. You really don't want to do that because that ends up making your love interest character into more of a flat character. Overall, you want to make sure that all of the characters in your story are very important and crucial to your story, and your love interest character type is no exception. If your character is just there for the protagonist or other main character to fall in love with, and they don't do anything else in your entire story, then they need to be fixed. A good love interest character is a character type that your readers should also want to fall in love with too. A love interest character should also have their own goals, hobbies, and interests outside of the main story, or told within the progression of your manga, comic, or light novel. My second tip for writing a love interest character is consider what they can teach the protagonist. A good love interest character will usually be there to teach the main character something about themselves. Through the kindness of a love interest character, your protagonist may also learn to be kinder. Through the love interest motivation, your protagonist may also learn to be more motivated. So your love interest in a story should teach the protagonist something new, or at least help them to expand and grow as a character over the course of the story. My third tip for writing a love interest character is you need to give each character their own story. So instead of focusing on just the romance and their connection, try also considering their own story, the story of the love interest, but also the character they are supposed to be with. So if your love interest was the protagonist, consider what their story would be like. What goals would they have and how would they progress? Once their stories are both interesting enough on their own, it can make more sense when you bring these characters together in a romantic connection. My fourth tip for writing a love interest character is consider the chemistry and the spark between these two characters, the love interest and the character that they are supposed to be with. You don't want it to be something superficial. If you make it too superficial, if it's just based off looks or that kind of attraction, it's going to be really unrealistic for these characters to be together in your story. So what you ultimately want to do is you want to base it more off common interests or hobbies or common goals, and then that will make it more natural for these characters to be together over the story. Or it will make it more natural for them to have a falling out over the story, depending on where you want to go with this character type. My fifth tip for writing a love interest character is make their connection change over time. The story will change and the characters will change and grow too, so it would make sense for your love interest and the romance to also change as well. There could be a falling out in their connection, or things could work out and get even better. Romance in stories can build into something more, or it can fail. This same thing about things building into something more or failing can relate to the characters, their goals, or even just situations in the story. There are so many reasons why a relationship in a story could succeed or fail, and you should really show this as you are developing this particular character type. And my sixth tip for writing a love interest character is make them irreplaceable to the story. Even if the romance doesn't work out, your love interest character should still be someone who is very important to the story. If you could take this character away and the story doesn't change at all, then they really need to be fixed. A good love interest character should be like any other character type, and they should have their own hobbies, goals, and their own decisions that they make that really affect and drive the story. My eighth character type in this video is the tertiary characters. Now, these are characters who aren't centrally prominent to your story, but they are characters who help make up the world in your story. They might be characters who are in the background more, but they should also be there to make some smaller decisions in the story, but they'll usually just be there who they might talk to the protagonist, or they might make minor choices in your story. A tertiary character is someone who isn't significant in your story, but they will help to make up the world of your story. They won't be a major aspect to your protagonist's tale, but they will be there to help fill out the world. Some examples of tertiary characters in anime are Shino from Naruto, Mayu from Noragami, Sayori from Vampire Knight, and Sumiya from Toradora. So here's how to write a good tertiary character type. My first tip for writing a tertiary character type is that you need to give them a reason to be in your story. There will usually be a pretty natural reason for them to be there. They might be in the same training squad, in the same school or class, in the same town, because these are the characters that make up the world of your story, so there is usually a good reason why they should be there in the first place. My second tip is make them contribute something to the plot. Even if these characters are not major, they should still be there for a reason. Your main character might feel worried about a test, and your tertiary character is there to encourage them to do it. This causes your main character to feel motivated. So these tertiary characters don't deeply influence the world, but they can be there to help contribute to the plot in small ways as the story progresses. My third tip is give them their own lives and interests. A tertiary character might not be super important in the story, but they will still have their own lives and interests. You might not directly show their lives in the story, but you should still keep it in your own mind as the writer. Their interests and their lives should show in the way they talk to the main characters and the way they act. And my fourth tip for writing a tertiary character is you need to make them grow over the story. They won't grow to the same extent as the main characters do, but they will change. They might look different, they might have gained new skills, they might move to new places, or they might have fulfilled an important goal. So regardless of what it is exactly, keep in mind that even your tertiary characters need to change. You see this a lot in Naruto as well. When Naruto gets older over the course of the story, even if the other characters are minor characters, they also naturally get older too. My ninth character type in this video is the Confidant character type. The Confidant character type is the character that your protagonist or main characters might go to for some comfort or some supporting words. A Confidant character could be blended into any of the other previous character types. Some examples of anime confidants are Toru Honda from Fruits Basket, Mami Tomoe from Madoka Magica, and Violet Evergarden from Violet Evergarden. So here's how to write a good confidant character. My first tip for writing a confidant character is they need to listen more than give advice. A mental character is usually the kind of character that gives advice, and of course, a confidant character can be blended in with the mental character. But usually if you're creating a standalone confidant character, they'll be there more to listen rather than to directly give advice. Sometimes the best way to comfort someone is to just listen to them, and this is usually what the role of the confidant character is. A confidant will simply be there for the main characters, and they might just listen to them or comfort them. They usually won't be harsh, they'll just be kind, encouraging, and supportive. My second tip for writing a confidant character is that they usually have gone through their own struggles too. That's why they are such a kind and empathetic character. The struggles that the protagonist may be going through are usually things that the confidant has gone through also. For example, Toru Honda can be so comforting to others because of her own family background and the things her selfless mother taught her. And my third tip for writing a confidant character is that they can be very selfless at times. A lot of confidant characters are very self-sacrificing. They might put themselves lower in order to make others feel happy. They would likely listen to others even if it hurts them to hear it. And when someone else is in pain, they might also feel that pain on a subconscious level. My 10th character type are comic relief characters. Comic relief characters are usually merged in with some of the previous character types. A comic relief character is there to help add humour to the story, and they're also there to help lighten the darker moments in the story. Adding a comic relief character can add some pace and interest to your story, as well as make your readers laugh when times call for it. Some examples of anime comic relief characters are Sunohara from Clannad, Tamaki Suo from Ouran High School Host Club, and Brooke from One Piece. Here's how to write a good comic relief character. My first tip is make them more than a comic relief character. For this type of character, I recommend you merge them with other character types. Having just a comic relief character on their own can be very difficult to write properly and still keep them interesting. Regardless, consider how you can make them more than a comic relief character. Like everyone else, they also have gone through their struggles and their triumphs. They also have their own goals and things they wish to do in their life. However, unlike the other characters, they are the kind of character who tries to put a positive spin on things. They are more of a glass half full kind of character. When other characters might be gloomy, they would likely be there to try and cheer things up. My second tip for writing a comic relief character is that they don't need to be a clown. A good comic relief character will usually have a lot of wit, and the comedy they use might be there to lighten darker situations. Take advantage of the natural comedy caused in moments of the story, and use this type of comic relief character to help drive that comedy. A simple sarcastic comment placed at the right moment can make readers laugh. They don't need to be forcibly a clown in order to add humour to the story and make the readers laugh. Good comedy actually comes from natural situations. My third tip for writing a comic relief character is that they need to have their own story. This is why I recommend you merge a comic relief character with another character type, because a comic relief character should be more than just that, and they really should have their own story too. Their story is what takes them beyond being just a comedy character. And my fourth tip is that they don't need to be funny all the time. In fact, it can make serious moments feel more serious when your comedy relief character also gets more serious. They don't always need to be making jokes, because sometimes the situation calls for a more dramatic moment. My 11th character type is the parent or sibling figure. The parent or sibling figures are characters who might actually be a parent or sibling, or they are a figure of those characters. They're the kind of character that your protagonist might look up to or admire as that kind of character type. They need to basically take on the role of that kind of parent or sibling figure to your protagonist or to your other main characters. One example of an anime parent or sibling figure is Minato from Naruto, but of course there are so many different anime parents, siblings, or figures of those characters. Keep in mind that by parent or sibling figure, these are usually the kind of figures that your protagonist or main characters might expect of a parent or sibling. So these characters will usually take on the role of that for your main characters. They might take on the traits that a good parent or a sibling would have. So for the most part, a parent or sibling figure will be someone who is kind and caring and encouraging. They might remind the protagonist of a parent or sibling they wish they had. A parent or sibling figure character type in a story will likely not be abusive because that's not the kind of character type your protagonist would likely want to look up to. Here are some ways to write this particular character type. My first tip is that they need to have the characteristics of a good parent or sibling. Again, this depends on what characteristics your protagonist may expect. If your protagonist had abusive parents or siblings, then maybe their figure of a parent or sibling would be someone abusive as well. Maybe if someone was abusive to them, they would see that person as a kind of figure. However, in most cases, the parent or sibling figure in a story will be someone who is kind and nurturing. They will be the ideal characteristics your protagonist would want in a parent or sibling. The traits of this character type might be that they are kind, nurturing, friendly, and responsible. The traits can vary depending on the kind of parent or sibling figure your character might want. The parent or sibling figure in the story could actually be a real parent in the story or a real sibling. My second tip for writing a parent or sibling figure in a story is that they will normally be very responsible. In most cases for this character type, they will be very responsible. They might do chores, help with cooking, teach the characters things, and take care of them. They will look after the protagonist and other characters the way a good parent or sibling should. And my third tip for writing this character type is that they will give good advice. A parent or sibling figure in a story may have also gone through their share of difficult situations. It's likely that from this they would have good advice to give. Like the mentor character, they might help to give words of wisdom when the characters need it, but like the confidant character, they will be there to listen if the moment calls for it. A parent or sibling figure character type is sort of like a mix of a mentor character and a confidant, but also shown in a more parent or sibling-like way. And my final character type that you will need in your own manga, comic, or light novel is the authority figure. Now again, this is a character that helps to make up the world, and having these authority figures can mean that it can restrict certain activities that your protagonist may be able to do otherwise. An authority figure in a story is the characters who are controlling certain situations, and as I said, they can stop your protagonist from doing things that might be too easy to do otherwise. They add restrictions to your story. Here is how to write a good authority character in your own manga, comic, or light novel. So my first tip is that their authority will stem from their job. So usually there aren't an authority character just for the sake of it. There's usually a stronger reason as to why they need to be the authority. And usually with this authority, they might stop the protagonist from doing something that they are not allowed to do. And my second tip for writing an authority character is that they can range from being harsh to being friendly. Of course, there is a whole range of traits to a character that they can have, but for the most part, an authority figure in a story will either be really harsh or more friendly and welcoming. However, no matter their traits, they must remain the authority and keep that level of control in order for them to be categorized as authority characters. So that is all the character types you will need in your own manga, comic, or light novel. Thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what your favorite character types are because I would love to hear about it. Feel free to chat with me on any of my social media at MidnightXcross because I always enjoy hearing from you. Again, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!